Hello, everyone. My name is Gianna Williams. I'm an outreach specialist for the City of Dallas in the Office of Environmental Quality and Sustainability. In our department, we work on many different environmental topics each day, working to help preserve Dallas's natural resources and to encourage everyone to practice good environmental behaviors. Our Earth Day Everyday program is the result of the combined efforts of the Central Library and the Office of Environmental Quality and Sustainability, and it aims to highlight the many ways that we can care for the planet during the Earth Month and beyond. This long-standing partnership between OEQS and the library has produced many informational programs that cover topics such as zero waste, water conservation, stormwater, and ways that everything ties into one another. Since April is Earth Month, it's a perfect time to celebrate all that our planet provides. One of the most impressive things about our planet is how interconnected everything is. For example, we make sure to save water in our homes, yards, and at work because we share our freshwater reserves with other humans, animals, and plants across the state. The plants here in Texas can grow and thrive when we care for the water that runs through the state. These plants can be used for food, shade from the Texas sun, and some other applications you might not be familiar with. Would you like to learn about what Texas plant the U.S. Navy needed during World War II? What about the native Texas plant that is associated with the French Legion of Honor medal? If you have an appreciation for nature, history, or both, you'll love today's program. Today, we're going to hear about different Texas plant tales from certified master gardener, Carolyn Rozier. Carolyn Rozier is a seasoned educator, Dallas County Master Gardener, North Texas Master Naturalist, and lover of nature. She has certifications in entomology and plant propagation, as well as a variety of presentations that she is well versed in. Her love of plants in particular was cultivated by her grandmothers that introduced her to the art of gardening. Since she was a child, she has always had a knack for gardening, as evidenced by her extensive background. We're so glad to have Carolyn with us, sharing her knowledge of plants here in Texas.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. And before I start, I have to tell you that this program is made possible by, the Dallas County Master Gardeners. And just like KERA, we will have a commercial at the very beginning, and then it's commercial free after that. But we are part of the Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service. And our mission is to educate the public about good horticultural practices. And how many of you knew that there was an extension office here in Dallas? You probably all knew that. Most of the audiences I give talks to have no idea what an extension agent does or an office. So we have a help desk that people can email gardening questions, and then our people at the desk will look up the answers on the Texas A&M website, which if you try to negotiate is a little difficult. We want to advocate for water-wise and earth-kind gardening. And we're also on Facebook and Instagram. But today, we're going to talk about Texas plant tales, and it's very appropriate that we're in a library because we're going to tell stories about the plants. So this is a little different. I'm not going to tell you how to grow the plants. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the history of the plants. And today we're going to see what these items have in common with Texas plants, like a broom, or barbed wire, or space program, or wine, or pralines, a teddy bear, the French Legion of Honor, and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. So we're going to see which of these plants are connected with those things. And the stories that plants can tell us can be about the flower itself. It may grow strangely or may have certain characteristics. It can be about the people who discovered it, or the inspiration it gives, or the history associated with that one. So we're in the library and we're going to have story time. And every story begins once upon a time. And we'll see if you know which explorer I'm going to talk about. An explorer set out on an adventure in 1527, and they came from Spain with 3 ships, 600 men, and 10 women. And that just blows my mind about the 10 women. But anyway, how many of you went to grade school in Texas? Do you know who this explorer is? He had a really strange name, and when you were in the 3rd grade, you laughed about it and made jokes about it. No, but no. Cabeza de Vaca, the head of the cow. Cabeza de Vaca, that was his name. And he gave us the earliest written account of the plants of South Texas. And unfortunately, they got to what would have been Cuba. They lost 2 of their ships. They had 1 ship left. And what their mission was to explore the Florida Peninsula. And they had 1 ship left, so they started up toward Florida. There was a shipwreck about where Tampa would have been. Anybody been to Tampa? Well, that was where they shipwrecked. And so they were going overland. Finally, they had eaten all their horses. They had nothing. They were able to make a raft, and 30 of them were able to get on the raft. So they started out on the raft, and they came upon a really bad storm at the mouth of the Mississippi. So we think it was a hurricane. So there have been lots of hurricanes around New Orleans. So there were only 3 left after that. 600 men started out, and you've got 3 left that are on the mission. And they come upon what they called the Island of Misery. And what island do you think that is off the coast of Texas? Does anybody get? Yes, Galveston. They came to Galveston. Now, Galveston has no fresh water, and so it wasn't a good place to be. But there were some Native Americans that were down there collecting plants, and you could either say they rescued them or they enslaved them, either way. I don't know, but they took these 3 guys in, And sometimes they ask Cabeza de Vaca to be a medicine man. And I found this really interesting in reading his book, that he didn't do anything, but people would say, oh, I feel better after I've been to see you. So he tried being a medicine man. This is a picture of him. And he must have been an extraordinary person, because he was actually the finance officer for the expedition. But he was really good with languages. And all of the native tribes had a different language. And he was able to communicate with all the different tribes. So they would send him off as a trader and barter for things. So I thought he was a very interesting person. And when he finally escaped and got down to Mexico City, where there were some more Spaniards, he got home to Spain and wrote about his travel. And you can find that book in the library. The thing is, there are so many translations. I'll read one and it'll say certain things. I'll read the next one and it's saying something else. So it's very interesting about all the different translations. But one of the plants that he wrote about, he was the first one to write about the flora and fauna of Texas. And one of the things he wrote about a lot was the prickly pear cactus. And this is a picture of the cactus in my old yard with a nice bumblebee. And the bumblebees would come and just dive into the pollen. It was amazing to see them. And my whole front yard really was cactus. I loved cactus. I did not have to water it. Now, there are a lot of different names for the prickly pear. And the one I think is the best is the flapjack cactus. I thought that was an interesting name. It's called the Indian fig because the fruit looks like a fig, sort of. And in Texas, there are two species, one in the east and one in the west. Now, the plant is really interesting. The pads are really the stems. And it has a special metabolism that lets it get through drought. It can actually hibernate. And it does the photosynthesis at night. Other plants can't do that. And it keeps them from losing moisture during the day when they do that. So it's very special, and they can get through all sorts of droughts. And the leaves, you might think that the pads are the leaves, but these little things here are called glochids. And they're on the new growth. This is the new pad. And eventually, they think these are like the leaves, but eventually these glochids fall off and you have spines left. Now, the old part of the cactus, they might have lost the spine, but these have little tiny spines. And I brought one. You can see Now, you do not want to touch even the little tiny spines because they'll stick to your hands and it's really hard to get them out. Now, they found not only an account of Cabeza de Vaca, but prehistoric evidence. They found pollen and they found seeds from the cactus. And the native tribes had a lot of lore about the prickly pear cactus because it was very important to them, especially those in South Texas. Now, there is a native legend from the Aztecs. Now, the Aztecs started out as nomads, and the Great Spirit or someone told them that when they came to a lake with a rock in the middle and a cactus growing out of the rock and an eagle with a snake in its mouth, they were supposed to stop their wandering and stay in that place. And where do you think that place was? The city, Mexico City, Mexico City. And this is the flag of Mexico. They still believe that, and evidently they saw that. Very strange. We also find that the prickly pear was in literature, and O. Henry wrote about it, and he said that if you were in a prickly pear flat, it would be to die, almost the death of the thief on the cross, pierced by nails. So I had cactus growing in my yard, and they would get about 6 foot tall sometimes. I have to keep cutting them down. I'd have to hire people to come and cut them down and then plant them again. And you couldn't have walked through those cactus. It's a very good fence. Now, in art, the father of Texas art is Julian Onderdonk. He was an impressionist, and he did a lot of painting in the hill country. And if you're doing things in the hill country in the spring, you're going to see bluebonnets, but there was probably no place he could go that he didn't also see the prickly pear cactus growing. Now, Cabeza de Vaca told us about the people that he was with, and they were going 3 or 4 days without any food. I mean, he said there were no lizards, there were no rabbits, there was nothing. I don't know what the deal was, but they would move from place to place when the cactus were in bloom. And then they would get the figs or the fruit, and they could also eat the new growth. And you can get the new growth. That's what I passed around. You can also buy it in a jar. You don't have to go out and get it. You can buy it in a jar. And if you go to El Rancho, they have the prickly pear pads that they have already cut off the spine. And I have found that that's about the only thing you can do to get rid of the spines, is just cut them off. So if you want to try them out, You can do that, but Cabeza de Vaca said it really saved the people he was with and him. What he said they used the prickly pear for, not really to purify water, but what they would do is they would cut the pad and squeeze out all the moisture inside. It would form like a jelly on the top of the water, and he said you wait about 30 minutes and it would take all the sediment down to the bottom. So it would be purer than it was. He also mentioned it's used as a medicine. You cut it again so that the inside is open, and they used it for bandages and to heal wounds. If you had some old cactus, you could find some really long spines that you could use as weapons, put on the end of their arrows. But what I found most intriguing is they use them for bags. Now, the people he was with, he said, had no kind of pottery or anything to carry anything in. I just couldn't believe that. They would have to use like rabbit bladders and things to put it, but they also would get some of the big prickly pear pads, hollow them out, and use them as bags. Found that very strange. Now, food. Okay. I also have some recipes over there if you want to try and cook any of these yourself. You can boil them and you can fry them, you can bread them. They're sort of like green beans, really. And these are the fruits that sort of look like figs. And they're called tunas and taste like kiwi. And you can eat them raw. You're going to have to peel them, however, because they have these little tiny spines too. And I have tried to make jelly, and I had these little tiny spines all over the kitchen, and I didn't do. You pretty much have to peel them, is what I found. And it is good. You have to add a lot of sugar, but you can make jelly out of it. And you don't have to go through all that peeling them with cactus jelly. There you go. You can have cactus jelly this fine. And really, prickly pear cactus is a big crop in South Texas and in Florida, because a lot of people do eat cactus. Now, the Spaniards discovered that they could get a red dye. Now, it's not from the tunas or the fruit. They're red, but it's total water soluble. You don't get any stain. It's the insect. These are the insects called cochineal insects. And when you squish them, they come out with this red dye. So when the Spaniards, it was hard to find things that would make red dye. When the Spaniards figured this out, they started picking up all this cactus that had the insects and shipping it to Europe. And they used it for the British Army's redcoats. And the Royal Canadian Mounted Police also used it because it gave a bright red. You also may find it in some food, the cochineal. If it says cochineal, this means that it's an organic dye and it's not going to be red dye number 4 or whatever. So some things still have the cochineal as dye. And that is the story of the prickly pear. So don't be afraid to grow them, but you have to grow them where they're not going to get much water at all. And mine, they must have lasted 50 years in the front of my house. Okay, this next plant is native to this area of Texas. What do we think that is? Oh, it's not, yeah, you might think it's Carolina snail seed, but yeah, it's actually Yopon holly.
Wow.
And it,
Mine don't look like that. Just think about it.
well, some years they will.
Okay.
It has a lot of different names. It's called emetic holly, and it's native to the eastern half of Texas and throughout the Gulf states. But its scientific name is Ilex vomitoria. Okay. And it comes to us from Cabeza de Vaca. He talked about it and how the leaves were boiled to make a tea. And he wrote about this and he said the women had to make the tea, but they couldn't drink it. And when the Indians shouted, "Who wants to drink?" the women were supposed to immediately stop where they were and not move. And if one of them moved, they were beaten with sticks. And then they had to pour out all the tea, and they had to disgorge. I think that's an interesting, disgorge all the tea they had drunk. So it isn't that the leaves are poisonous or anything, and that isn't why it was called vomitoria. But there were also other kinds of reports about, from Florida especially, where the natives would have these ceremonies that would go on for 3 days, and all they would do is drink, and they would drink gallons of this tea. And so was it any wonder that they were vomiting all of that stuff back up? But the explorers saw all that, and that's why it got the name vomitoria. The Yopon leaves were used as a tea here in Texas because it was hard to get the Chinese tea. And so even women were allowed to drink it. And they still use it as mate in South America. Okay, the next one is the state tree of Texas, and you probably know all about pecans. But its scientific name is Caria illinoisensis, because that was the southernmost, well, the northernmost border of where you would find pecan tree. And we have 8 species in Texas. And it's a very important agricultural crop. We used to be the very first exporter of pecans. However, we have lost our title to Georgia. They produce more than we do. But it wasn't of economic importance until they developed the soft shell pecan. And that was developed by a gentleman in San Saba. And there is a mother tree there. This isn't a picture of it. You can't get to see the mother tree, but they have, every year they have a big festival in San Saba. That's where the soft shell pecan originated. And of course, Cabeza de Vaca again is telling us that it saved him from starvation. And he gave us the first written record of pecans. Hernando de Soto also, he named the Nueces River because of the pecan groves that lined the river. They are no longer there, but when he was there in 1540, there were lots of them. And it was the French that named it the pecan, and they invented pralines, I suppose. All the tribes too also stored large amounts of pecans in underground places that they would remember where they were. Then they made meal out of the pecans and pounded it into their venison, and that became pemmican. The pecans were also used in barter, and they used the shells to make a dye, and they made tea out of it, and it must have had some antifungal properties because it was used to treat ringworm. So I thought it was very interesting that you could make this tea and you could drink it, or you could pour it over your head if you had wanted it. The pecans were also used at the beginning of the space program because they have so much protein, vitamins, minerals, and were easy to transport again. Okay. Can you tell me some names for this plant?
Grab it. Horse apple. The Osage.
Bodard. Osage orange, that's another one. I know, there are just lots. It was called bois d'art because the Indians, the natives, used it for their bows, wood for their bows.
Someone in Zoom said those are her favorite, but she doesn't see them very much anymore.
No, you don't, not in the city. But it is native to this very area. This is where it started out, northeast and north central Texas. And it has moved all over the country. And it's really interesting why it moved. It suckers. If you keep cutting it back, it suckers. And it makes like a hedge. And if you've ever seen the long spikes on the branches, it would be very hard to get through. And they used it as fences. So places that didn't have a lot of rocks to make fences or a lot of wood to make fences, they planted these. And that's why, I mean, they were sending seeds all over the country to make these hedges. Nobody tried to eat the horse apples though, but you would think they would try to eat it. But it was a French explorer that named it, and Patrick Henry had a beau d'arc in his at his house in Virginia, and the seeds got to Virginia because Lewis of Lewis and Clark sent seeds back to Thomas Jefferson, and Thomas Jefferson gave it to all his friends. Now, barbed wire was modeled off of the spines that you see on the beau d'arc. And after the Civil War, if you remember, well, but after the Civil War, they had all these factories that were making guns. They didn't need the guns anymore. They didn't have anything to make. So they started making barbed wire. And the beau d'arc is a really hard wood. And a lot of houses were made, their foundations were made from the beau d'arc wood. And there are still houses, maybe on Swiss Avenue and around, the older houses that have the beau d'arc foundations that are still there because they're termite proof, they are so hard. And on Elm Street, there used to be paving stones. That's what Dallas used. They used the beau d'arc wood for paving stones. And there used to be some on Elm Street, but I think with all the construction in it, I don't think there's anything left. It's a shame, but yeah.
They also say that the reference to the Yellow Brick Road
Was from the beau d'arc?
Oh,
That's interesting, yeah. Okay, this is our favorite flower, our favorite Texas flower, which is interesting that Cabeza de Vaca never mentioned it. He either didn't get to the right place in April to see them or something, but he mainly wrote about things that helped him survive. And probably if he saw something beautiful, he wouldn't have written about it, but I'm just amazed that he didn't say anything. But the bluebonnets, the Lupinus texensis is what we have here in this area. It's a member of the pea family. It also has a lot of different names. But there are 5 other species in the state, depending on where you go. Now, I'm always interested when I'm looking at the flowers. Well, what do you think? Why were they called bluebonnets? And I will show you. Now look at the flowers and look at the bonnets. And so that is why they were called bluebonnets, because this is what the bonnets look like at the time. sort of like a bun, yeah. But they were also called conejo because people thought that when you looked out over all of the bluebonnets and saw the little white, it looked like a cottontail rabbit. The settlers were not very knowledgeable about plants because they didn't like the bluebonnets. Because they called it the wolf flower, because they thought it took nitrogen from the soil, not fixing nitrogen. Of course, they didn't know that at the time, but they were not happy to have a lot of bluebonnets because they thought it was going to take the nutrients from the soil. But this, I think, is just the greatest quote. Prairies were laughing with flowers. Laughing with flowers. I just think that's great. In ravishing luxury. Okay, here we come to Teddy Roosevelt in 1905, coming down to Austin, and it was in April. And so they sent all the school kids out to gather bluebonnets and throw them in the path as he went to the Capitol. So that's Teddy Roosevelt. There was also some intrigue in the legislature because the colonial Danes wanted the bluebonnet as the state flower. And there was a lot of opposition to that. It took them a long time. And finally, it was approved that Lupinus texensis would be the state flower. However, there was still a lot of opposition even after it was passed. And it wasn't until 1971. The colonial Danes did this in 1901. In 1971, finally, the legislature compromised and said the state flower is going to be any of the lupins or the bluebonnets that are in Texas or ever found in Texas. So any of the species would be considered the state flower. There was an Aztec legend that there was a plague going on, and the medicine men said, well, we have to have somebody volunteer. Now, see, this is the story you can read now. It says they volunteered to have their head cut off.
Oh,
And she had on a blue headdress. Her head was cut off. The blue headdress became the bluebonnet. So I think that was a pretty gory one, but that is fine. We have a lot of wild grapes in Texas. Most of the species are found in the U.S. And the Texas has 12 different species. The Spanish brought cultivated grapes to Texas. The natives were not drinking wine or anything, even grape juice, because especially Mustang grape, which we see here all the time, they called cutthroat grapes because they were so acidic, you couldn't drink them if you got juice from them. But Texas became very important to the worldwide wine industry. This is a picture of France, and all of their vines are dying. And they found out it was an insect that came from the United States, the East Coast, that started attacking the rootstock of the vines. And they didn't know what to do. And so they came over here. It was your insect. We want you to help us. So Texas had to save the French wine industry. And this gentleman, if you go to Denison, there is a museum there, Thomas Munson. He figured that down in the hill country, that would be close to the kind of soil that they had in the French wine country. And so he went down and he found rootstock that was immune to the insect that they could use instead of the rootstock they had. And so he saved the Texas wine industry, and they gave him the French Legion of Honor medal. Yeah. Now the last one is the yucca. This is one I've grown. There are 15 different species in Texas. And it has a lot of different names too. But I planted it because I wanted the yucca moth. The yucca moth only lays eggs inside the flower of a yucca. Then the larvae eat the seeds inside, but there's still more seeds, so they're not going to devastate the plant. But I thought it was just interesting. I wanted to see this yucca moth, so that's why I planted it. It was used for survival by the natives. They could eat almost any part of it, depending on whether it was new growth or not. They found a lot of archaeological specimens. They used the fibers to make clothing and shoes and belts. And they used the roots to make yucca soap. And I was able to find, it's called cactus prickly pear soap, but it also has yucca root in it too. So you can buy the soap. You don't have to go dig up your yucca plant. And in World War II, they had to use the fibers from the yucca because jute couldn't be gotten from India. That's what they used before. So they started using the fibers from the yucca. They used it for tent poles. They used it for all sorts of things, paint brushes and brooms. They used it for brooms. And I had a yucca broom until I moved to an apartment. And I didn't take the yucca broom with me, but it was a lovely broom and lasted a long time. But all the plants are going to bloom happily ever after. The some of the references that I used. So anyway, that's, I don't think you'll probably have any questions, but maybe. I think that's interesting about the yellow brick road.
Yeah.
We had not heard that.
That wood is very hard to burn also, so it's not very flammable. And of course, like you said, the Indians used it to make their arrows, it was so hard.
Yeah.
And they could, I guess, gather them back up, take them back out of the animal or whatever they used it for, and reuse those arrows. So I understand it says protected species now. It's on the protected list. I'm sure.
Really?
I think so.
As many as you see,
I see a lot of them
driving
in
through
Frank
that
County
hill
Forest.
country. I can't imagine, but
Yeah, they grow out in the Great Treaty Forest here along the river. You'll see them. And, there's one out at the Texas Horse Park where, which is off, Elam Road out there. And, there's a big one and I'm always fascinated because it drops so much fruit, you know. And I guess there's nothing really that likes the fruit. I think deer kind of like it some.
well,
Pretty.
you know, I used to have people stop and ask me if they could gather the fruit because they wanted to make jelly out of it,
Oh, really?
or they wanted to just eat it.
Oh, really?
This one lady told me, she said it reminded her of travels with her father when they would travel and they would stop and eat the fruit.
Did you just let yours grow or did you cut it and then have the suckers come out?
No, I would
Sprouts.
just let it
Let
grow.
it grow. And the prickly pear, when you had to cut the prickly pear back, did you have to dig it out or did they just cut it off? Did they just
It
like
doesn't
split it?
have, they pulled it out and then they took some of the newer, pads and stuck it in the ground.
And they
That's
started
all you
again.
have to do.
Mhm.
But the roots are so shallow.
Just pull it out.
Mhm.
It's interesting, isn't it, that it's able to stay in the ground through high wind, because it's pretty heavy. When they can get large. Yeah. And so the fruit, the little, you said that fruit's called tunas,
Uh-huh.
the little reddish. I never knew that, yeah, interesting.
You can get them at, most of the Hispanic grocery
Yeah.
stores.
I see them.
But one of the things that's happening, and I was part, since I had so much cactus, I was part of a research study from the museum. There is a moth, the cactus moth, that's coming from South America. And it's pretty much devastating the crops, especially in Florida. And we were trying to find out if it was moving to Texas, and it was. They had found it down in South Texas. I didn't find any up here, but down in South Texas, they found some of the cactus.
I thought you were gonna say when you talked about the grapevines, that that man went down and discovered how to neutralize that insect, but instead they actually shipped rootstock to France.
Right.
So I wonder if they figured out how to get rid of the insects.
No, I doubt it. I doubt it.
Once they proliferate, they.
Yeah, because that rootstock was resistant. The insect didn't do anything to our species over here.
But somehow it got over to France.
Yeah.
Somebody had it either inadvertently, I'm sure, to
Yeah.
get rid of them.
Well, there's a whole group. I've been looking at their, programs that they've had. They're trying to prevent all these, I don't know what you call them, bio insects and seeds getting into this country from other countries that are going to devastate.
Right, somehow. I have a question about the yopon. So literally the yopon in my yard, I can make tea out of it?
If you want it.
Really? I could just take the leaves,
You could cut it up, cut
just
up the
take the leaves
leaves
and
and,
chop them up and put hot water over them and steam them.
you know, I don't know, you might want to dry them first.
Right.
That's what I was thinking.
Okay. Yes, yes.
Yeah, I think you would want to dry them. I was trying to think of mate in South America, they do dry it just like a tea.
But the berries are not, you don't use the berries,
Don't
just
use
the
the
leaves.
berries.
I had no idea. So,
Can't use the berries. All right, well, thank you all.
Thank you so much. Your bonnet is so interesting. So that makes